But is there anything you want to say before we get into West Africa?
Oh, I mean, I don't have any sort of particular introduction. I mean, I would say, yeah, on top of what we're talking about, I did have an article in the Cradle about, well, it was just titled "The French Never Stopped Looting Africa, Now the Tables Have Turned," and that is, yeah, about the history of French colonialism and neocolonialism in the region. So, yeah, I also, I'm writing for the Libertarian Institute now as well.
Oh, fantastic.
So that's just another thing to say in my introduction, I guess.
Yeah, how'd you hook that up?
Well, so I was interviewed for anti-war radio, and it went so well that Scott gave me a job, which is impressive because it was not that kind of interview.
Wow, that's fantastic, dude. That's really great. Cool. All right, well, that's awesome. So, yeah, so he's doing that. That's cool. It's good to know that Brad's doing that. I'm just going to ride your coattails, man. So, in other news, before we get into it, also 5 till midnight, we're doing that on Monday nights now. That's going to be uncensored and everything. That's going to be with the Biting the Bullet guys. That page is set up and everything. It's got a crappy logo that's probably going to get replaced. And that's Biting the Bullet, Kyle Matochik, and Adam Nutter is what we're going to be doing. Yeah, Craig says he loves Scott Burton. I like him too. Love that guy. And I know a couple of those other dudes as well. Well, met them briefly. Okay. Pat McFarlane, that's a guy that I like, that I've talked to a little bit. Okay, West Africa, though. Let's talk about West Africa. So we're talking about West Africa. So West Africa is this area right here. We're going to get on a map that's closer on...
yeah, that's a map of the Sahel.
Yeah, so this right here, the Sahel is the region, if you're just listening, most of you are, the Sahel is the region between North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. So above, there's a certain culture, mostly Arab, above the Sahara, that's north of the Sahara, and that's in the countries of like Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Morocco, all these ones up here. And then down here is Sub-Saharan, and they are distinct religiously and economically and ethnically and culturally and in any way you can possibly think of. And then the Sahel is the region where they kind of blend, because the Arabs and the other groups up top, they mix in with the Sub-Saharans on the bottom. You know, there is a history of a lot of slaving. The Arab slave trade was much longer even than the transatlantic slave trade, and it put a lot more Sub-Saharan Africans in slavery. I'm not saying that to discount the Atlantic slave trade, but I am saying that so that you guys can understand.
I mean, culturally, though, the Sahel is way more attached to Sub-Saharan Africa because you have to cross the Sahara to get there. So,
yeah, right. So, and corrects me if I'm wrong, but there is an element of a caste, upper caste, like an upper caste system with like lighter skinned people.
Well, I mean, the area is tremendously diverse. Specifically in Sudan, there's like a ribberine elite, basically. But yeah, then there's Sudanese, Arabicized Sudanese tribes that have spread from Sudan and Chad and everywhere else. But yeah, there are definitely lighter skinned people, as well as like Tuaregs and various tribes that have spread over from Sudan, and then there are fully Sub-Saharan people there. I mean, there's a lot of large tribes in the area, especially like Fulani and like Hausa speakers and all sorts of different people.
So it's more complicated than just the lighter skin color. So it's more than just Arab to Sub-Saharan Africa. There's a bunch of different tribes, bunch of different groups that are related in different ways, right?
Yes, well, I mean, and then the Tuaregs are a nomadic Sahara tribe, but then in the Sahel, I mean, it's a region that you can do some agriculture in, like you can grow millet and stuff like that, dry land, so there are farming tribes and herding tribes, you know, that are nomadic across the region, and really all sorts of different people.
Yeah, absolutely. But it is a region of especially like a mix of cultures, but more so Saharan, right? Sub-Saharan, rather.
Yeah, I mean, in the band that is the Sahel, so like all of those countries on that map, the Sahel's only a narrow band going through them. That is right, basically along the southern border of Niger is the line where the Sahel is, so it kind of goes up and down across the continent. So yeah, then the northern part of all of those countries is the Sahara Desert.
Yeah, and we're gonna see another map in a second. I mean, okay, so actually we'll go to this guy after. Okay, share this tab instead. All right, so we're talking about Niger, which is this country here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and then to the west of Niger, you have Mali and Burkina Faso, and these guys are in ECOWAS. We're going to go back into that in a little bit. And then, or these guys are, I'm sorry, these are the guys that are like outside of ECOWAS right now.
Well, they're suspended members of ECOWAS.
Suspended. And then ECOWAS is like the guys that are aligned with the NATO people, so the Americans, as well as heavily the French, because the French are the ones that colonized in this whole region, right?
Not the whole region. I mean, Nigeria and Ghana and the Gambia and I believe possibly Togo as well were all British.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, they're Senegal is very French, and they still have close relations with France. Senegal is a really interesting country.
Yeah.
And they, so I mean, it is mostly French West Africa, but half of the total population is Nigeria. So in terms of the languages used by population, it's about half Anglophone and half Francophone. And of course, it's a second language for all of them. There are like many different tribal languages, probably 5 or 6 larger ones.
But probably the colonial languages, the English and the French, those are the languages used by the upper class. Am I correct in saying that?
Pretty much everyone knows their tribal language and the language they would learn in school.
Oh.
And so, I mean, like it's kind of how it works. Like, just for example, Tinubu, the president of Nigeria, has a kind of sketchy, questionable background. He was allegedly, or he was like adopted as a kid, but he doesn't have a birth certificate because when he was born, that was common. And they say he doesn't speak his native language with a Lagos accent, which is like where he's supposed to be from. There are like a lot of conspiracies about his background.
Yeah.
But anyway, so they basically do all know a tribal language. Like, in Niger, someone was telling me that the Hausa language BBC broadcast is really popular because it's like the native language in southern Niger and northern Nigeria. A journalist I know from Senegal thanked me in her native language. I don't know what it's called. I just had to look it up on Translate, and I was like, oh, she just thanked me in her like African tribal language. That's really cool.
That's pretty cool. I want that to happen to me. Holy crap. Yeah, so this is the region we're talking about. There's a lot of stuff going on. We're going to get into more of the specifics, but for anybody who's watching, I mean, so the first thing, before we get into the articles, which is going to be the bulk of our conversation, I'm going to try to just let Brad go. But this guy right here, I mean, this is Mohamed Bazoum. Okay, so this guy was the guy who just got ousted out. And if you're just listening, he's like, he looks tan. Like he's tan. He looks.
Oh yeah, so he's from an Arabicized Sudanese tribe associated with Chad. Sorry, his ethnic group is only 1.5% of the population of Niger, concentrated in the southwest or the southeast. So yeah, he's like from a Chadian tribe.
Right, and of course he's probably tied in with like old money Muslims who were doing the slaving, if I had to assume, right?
No, I mean, I guess I don't know that much about his background. He's mostly, he's mostly more than anything tied in with the prior president who convinced him that he could get elected as an ethnic minority, and then it happened one way or another. They're pretty widespread allegations of fraud. But, while there was a fair amount of slavery in the region, a lot more of what they're into is just like camel herding and trading, honestly.
So it was more common in the Eastern Sahel, is my understanding, right? Eastern.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the slaves went out through Congo and everything, and that specific area is not my specialty, but what I do know is that at the time of King Leopold's Congo, they made up this whole story about this Sudanese slave lord, and they used it as a false pretense to enslave all of the Congo on the grounds that they were freeing them. So,
wow.
I mean, I'm kind of, I don't know if you read the book King Leopold's Ghost.
No, I wouldn't.
They were seriously taking these free men and putting them in actual chattel slavery in chains and telling people that and calling them freedmen as their name as slaves was like the word they used for it, because they claimed they were liberating them from this Sudanese slave lord that they kind of made up. And so in England and everything, they were having all these galas among the upper class for freeing the Congolese people, and it was like the big social cause of the day, and no one knew what King Leopold was doing. And the only way they actually found out is that there was this clerk at this shipping company that was doing the books, and he realized that they clearly weren't paying for any of the goods they were getting just based on the numbers that the company had. And, they claimed like, oh, they're working, we're buying it from them, they're learning how to be free men and everything. So then he was like a whistleblower about it, and people looked into it and they're like, oh, this is a massive slavery operation where they're like chopping the hands off of the children of people that don't produce, enough rubber and everything. So, like I said, so I'm not such an expert in what the real truth about the Sudanese slave trade through that region is, but I do know that a massive lie about it was sold to the European public like 100 years ago and used to justify insane levels of oppression.
So somebody just asked in the comments, is this the one where they got their hands cut off? Yes, it was. So the thing is that it was a personal colony of King Leopold, which sounds like a cop-out, but it did have some very real implications for the amount of oversight, because it was a personal colony of the king rather than a publicly held.
Yeah, it was a private possession, yeah.
Right, so it was a private possession, and the fact is that I wouldn't have thought that it really made a difference, but
it did. There was zero oversight, yeah.
There was no oversight. The parliament wasn't able to do anything about it, or even if they knew about it. And once they did learn about it, the people apparently in Belgium were really mad about it, and it got pushed. It got put into Belgian hands of the actual government, of the civil.
Well, yeah, they forced him to put it in his will that they would inherit the Belgian Congo, and then he didn't really have a proper heir. His daughter. Do you remember that famous Habsburg murder-suicide? That was one of the things that led to Franz Ferdinand. And then he was shot and everything.
No, I don't remember that.
Okay, so yeah, Franz Ferdinand became second in line because the king's son was in a sketchy murder-suicide that to this day people still think is really weird. So that was the daughter of King Leopold of Belgium, was the woman that died in that. And then he didn't have his other heir for some reason. He had some lover that was a 16-year-old girl or something like that when he was an old man. But anyway, so what's crazy about this is that he didn't want them to inherit his money, so he just started all these massive public works projects to make all these huge buildings and stuff like that. And that's why NATO is, and the European Union are centered in Brussels in Europe, is because there are all these massive public works that he did with the looted wealth from the Congo so that the Belgian government wouldn't inherit his money. So everything NATO does, everything NATO and the EU does is seriously a testament to the insane amount of money that they looted from the Congo.
Oh my God. That's horrible, dude.
Yeah, it's crazy. You have to read King Leopold's Ghost. The Belgians didn't even really talk about this until the 90s when that book came out. They were still in denial about it for that long.
Oh my God. Dude, that's such a bad metaphor for this whole thing.
Yeah, and that's not how the specific buildings they meet in were built, because they were built there later, but the region, the section of Brussels that that they do all of this in was completely made what it is in the modern day with the money he was spending. He's remembered in Belgium as the builder king.
Yeah, wow, dude, that is really truly gross.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So one point I want to make about this, and then we'll move on back to this. But the one thing I want to point out, and I've talked about this before, I think episode 17 is about the position of the corporation in our culture and how important they are and how they are motivated by profit. The corporation is motivated by profit. Lots of these banana wars happened where democratically elected, traditionally held governments were overthrown so banana companies can move in. A lot of stuff that had to do with Native American, taking of Native American land, wasn't just regular settlers. A lot of it was at the behest of corporate interests and these patronage networks where people were giving out money. And there's something very dehumanizing about this quest for profit. And I have a lot of views about, I'm very libertarian. You guys know that, but there is something about corporate autocracy, or about the cold calculation of a profitable company that without proper oversight and with the wrong culture, you can end up cutting children's hands off and being horrible. And the fact is that in this particular case, the profit incentive, and this is true in a lot of ways about the early Columbus voyages, about the early colonies there, is that the profit incentive just kind of practically ended up with mass human death. And then once it was under the control of the government was able to actually put in oversight. So one of these types of situations is made better by government oversight. Another time I would think about this is private prisons. You got to get rid of private prisons. The incentives are just not there. From the
yeah, but even with the public prisons, you end up with a situation where the prison guards union protests in favor of incarceration just as much, because it's like a $40 an hour job in a terrible small town or whatever that has no other economy. So, I mean, basically, one way or another, people get screwed. But yeah, I mean, you try to have a degree of oversight.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get on to it. So these are the guys that took over, right?
Yeah.
Bunch of...
None of them are the main leader, but those are the people that announced the coup.
Oh, okay. That's his Colonel Major. It sounds made up. Colonel Major Amado Abdurrahmani.
Yeah, it's Abdurrahman, isn't it? I can't see it on the screen. Just blur it out. Abdurrahman. Yeah, it's really hard in this region because everyone has names I've never heard before, and there's a bunch of different actors.
Yeah, it really is. I tried to make sense of it in the logo that we made, or that I made. There's like a Arab dude with a French guy, a French soldier behind him, and then the other two guys are just like sub-Saharan African soldiers. Yeah. Although I don't think it's that clear cut racially. Those were just the Wojaks that I had available to me. Just so. Okay, so your quote here, I want to read that. It is evident that many more princes have lost their lives and their states through conspiracies than through open warfare, because being able to wage open war against a prince is within the reach of very few, while the possibility of conspiring against him is open to everyone. From Machiavelli Discourses 3.6. And why'd you pick that?
So he lost his kingdom through a conspiracy.
Yeah,
basically.
I'm sorry,
yeah.
I was being a dick.
Yeah.
Yeah, so do you want to start talking about this, or do you want me to?
I guess I can just give the basic explanation of what happened here. Is that they had essentially a Praetorian Guard called, the Palace Guards, that was of 700 men. And, their basically whole purpose was to stop coups, which was an idiotic plan in the first place. It's exactly the sort of people who do coups throughout all of history,
remember, he just said Praetorian Guard, like the Praetorian Guard who was...
Yeah,
own political
or like the Varangian Guard and the Byzantine and everything, yeah.
Yep, or the
anyway, so...
slaves.
Oh, the Janissaries.
Janissaries, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, anyway, basically, they're saying that Bazoum understood the dangers of these people being here and having this power, and though this Chiani, the one that took power, had stopped a coup in 2021 that allowed for the democratic transition of power, the guy was still trying to get rid of him, and he's like 62, so in what my wife called the ultimate boomer move, instead of just letting himself be fired or retiring, he caused all of these problems to stay in power longer than he should have. And then they took all of the power, and so then they started up whatever council to safeguard the nation, and basically now they're running the show, and that's the bulk of it. The bigger thing is that because there's been a lot of instability in this region and there's been many coups across it, the U.S. and France and Germany and other countries I didn't get so far into have been relying on Niger more and more to continue their security plans in the region, especially the Agadez drone base in northern Niger.
Largest drone base in sub-Saharan Africa, or
in the world, actually.
In the world.
Yeah,
the largest U.S. drone base in the world is in Niger, where this coup just happened.
Yeah,
which is important. Important.
And it's actually also the most expensive building project in Air Force history. And
that's crazy.
It always does go over budget, but it went more over budget than usual because Agadez is in the middle of the desert, and it was difficult to get materials there and stuff like that. So, so it's right there, right next to the city. You can find it on Google Maps. There are actually reviews of the mess hall left by jokers, like they're like trolling. But regardless, you can easily, if you look at Agadez just on Google Maps, you can really easily find it. And there's reviews of the food at the mess hall, and you can see it pretty well. And so they're really allowing that. It has a huge range because, the Reaper drones and everything can go really far. So they have that. They also launch them out of the civilian airport in Niamey, and they have other bases throughout the country.
So are they launching things from Niger into like the Middle East? Is what you're
no, I actually made a map of the range. It's not in this. I just made it out of my own curiosity.
Oh.
But it goes about to southern Nigeria, but not quite to the coast, and then all around there. It's a huge chunk of West Africa though. So it covers at least parts of like 7 or 8 nations. Like all of Burkina Faso, most of Mali, into parts of, Libya and Algeria, and much of Chad. But most of the areas that it covers are really completely barren. But the concern is, there's human and drug trafficking, gun trafficking, there's terrorists moving around, setting up their camps in the desert, all this stuff like that. It has range over Timbuktu, which terrorists controlled for years. They had already been expelled by the time this base was operational. So, it has a big range all over the desert, but basically the U.S. and France just put ever more pressure on this weak state because they didn't have any other options, and, they were claiming that it was stable up until literally the day before the coup happened. And so
that recently, it feels.
Yeah, well, exactly. It's the same thing as like, the Afghan government will hold or anything else like that. Then that happened. And so it's really kind of the end of their strategy in the region. Chad is a military government, but it's French aligned, so they've been tolerating it at France's request. So, they still have some help there, but at this point, it doesn't really make sense for Chad to continue to work with them because it isolates Chad in the region being associated with France, because they're the only power anywhere near them besides Nigeria that remains aligned with the Western powers. But like I said, Nigeria is half of the total population of the ECOWAS bloc, so it is very important.
And is Nigeria is aligned with who?
Well, Nigeria is the closest to the British.
Okay, right, because they were a British colony. There were a lot of, it's a large country, number one, and it's a relatively developed country, right?
Compared to Niger and Chad, but those are the Sahel has the least developed countries in the world.
Right.
So relatively compared to them, it is more developed, but it still has, a low development level.
What about compared to Ghana? Or Gambia?
It's less developed than Ghana. It also has a much, much bigger population and is much more diverse and things like that. So a
lot of the upper class is just in Britain, right?
They have really bad brain drain, as bad as India. And so are Indians. Nigerians are the highest income level group in both the U.S. and the UK. They estimate that there are more Nigerian doctors outside of Nigeria than in the country.
I'm sure there are. It's good. So what has happened is what we're describing, just to expand on it a little bit, is that all the smartest and best qualified people in a place like Nigeria, which has a lot of connections, they have connections to the UK. Same thing with India, and because they speak English, because they're from an English colonized country here as well in the US and Canada, is that these people just emigrate. The upper class, which has all these skills and things, they just leave and they come to the US and they can slide right into the upper class in America or the UK or Canada.
Yeah, they're extremely successful around the world.
Yeah, and that's it's a problem for everybody. It's a problem for Americans. I'm not saying Nigerians people are coming and taking our jobs, but they are. The sum total of other people's upper classes coming to America it hurts our ability as Native Americans, as people born here, to excel and to get out of our middle class status. We can't move up economically as easily.
Yeah, it's really a global situation. It's also hard to compete with smart people who have a poverty mindset because it's the Tiger Mom phenomenon with Asians and everything. It's very similar. Yeah,
I don't see that as relevant because Nigeria is a poor country, right? But generally the people that are coming here are the upper class of that country, and they might
some of them are on scholarships and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think even even if they're on scholarships, I think generally I'd have to look at the numbers. I know it's true of India because you can kind of tell just by the last names the level of disproportionality.
Oh yeah, they're all Brahmins, yeah, for sure.
So yeah, they're like heavily disproportionately Brahmin. And the same is true of Nigeria. So yes, there are some, but it's a lower percentage of the population.
But yeah, it's brain drain in general for sure.
Yeah, and so not only does it hurt the United States, but it also, well, it hurts certain people in the U.S., but it really hurts Nigeria more because they lose everybody who has these marketable skills. The same thing is happening to Hungary and Poland, unfortunately, as the smaller, weaker countries in the EU are losing out both politically to countries like France and Germany, but they're also losing out at home with their best people leaving.
Yeah.
Which is why America was so great to begin with, because all the best people in Europe left for the better world, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Greatest country on earth, USA. But yeah. Did you have anything else? Or
no, I mean, that's the basic background of the situation. I can answer any other questions you might have.
Yeah, Arthur in the comments, no pepperoni on pizza tonight. Yeah, yes, stay halal. We're talking Muslim stuff tonight, so that's good.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, in Niger is almost entirely Muslim. Nigeria is split between Muslims and Christians.
Yeah, because it's at the bottom of that. So, and Arthur met a few Nigerians in the military, worked with a few still. Yeah, I any Nigerian I've ever met, I think they're great people. I think Zubi is Nigerian.
Zubi's Nigerian, yeah.
Yeah, love Zubi. Zubi is actually my, he has 1.1 million followers. He's my, like...
Oh yeah, this came up last time, actually.
Yeah, he's my mutual with the largest following, and I was very excited. Killer Mike retweeted me this week, though.
Oh, nice.
I'm actually maybe more excited about that because I'm a big Killer Mike fan.
Yeah, you were telling me that.
Yeah, isn't that funny? Can't believe I told you that too. All right, but I digress. Yeah, super nice folks they sure are. Nigerians are just wonderful.
Yeah, well, Africans are extremely polite and gracious in general.
Africans in general. I mean, I've never interacted with an African person, and actually, a lot of you know, like my best friend is she's the daughter of African immigrants. She's American, but
yeah,
her mom is from Gambia. Okay, but I digress. So I was really interested in what you were talking about here. So we got this situation, right? So our situation is that Niger, which is very important, it's a former French colony, still French involvement, and it's important to America because of the drone base in Niger. And the area has a lot of issues with Islamic terrorism, and there was just a coup there, which apparently came out of nowhere, at least to the public. And now what are we supposed to do here? And also, like, how does this change the situation with the countries around it? And one of the things that Brad brings up is the domino theory, once used to justify the U.S. war in Vietnam, has come true in Africa. And I love this comparison because I've always thought that the domino theory for Vietnam was actually not really disproven because we don't know what would have happened if the U.S. didn't go into Vietnam. It might have been better. It might have.
It's a fair point.
Right. So it's like I don't know if domino theory didn't work. I think if executed properly, it would completely make sense that domino theory is true, because if there's we know that countries will screw with the countries around them, and if a country is engaged in a civil war and then you help one side in that civil war, which is what Vietnam was, then that country, they're not able to be stable enough to invade somewhere else. So if you're even preoccupying them, you're at the very least, you're buying yourself time. In the total sum of it, what you might be doing is actually angering people in the countries around it and engendering them to the opposite side from you. But the theory itself, if executed properly, is completely sound. So that being said, what do you have to say on this part of the article?
Well, I mean, yeah, you have a point to an extent. I mean, I would say a difference here is that communism kind of involves teaching people to live differently than they always have, you know? I mean, that's that it does promise...
I think so does the American...
It does promise a lot of things. Yeah, well, exactly. I would just say the one thing here is that these areas have been under military governments a lot, so they were kind of trying to build something new here in these areas with weak state institutions. So it's not really that transformative having them switch to military governments. They really are trying to go their own way. I mean, Ibrahim Traore in Burkina Faso is at least kind of a revolutionary type of person in terms of what he says about how the country should function. But yeah, I would just say
it seems just like a elite to elite transfer of power with a different institution. Like it does. Is there something revolutionary about his leadership?
Well, not that we've seen so far, but they're certainly trying to make themselves less French aligned, and will probably ultimately be trying to take more control of their resources and everything like that.
Yeah, that usually doesn't work out for them.
No, it makes people very angry.
Whoever them is, it makes the wrong people very angry. Same.
Yeah.
You know what? I almost feel aligned with them because it feels like we have the same enemies.
Right. Well, exactly.
Yeah. So it's like, what are we supposed to do? We're just as useless as them almost.
No.
And I'm not to say that we're useless or they're useless, but in the context of this, I don't feel useless. I feel awesome. I'm having a great time. How about you, Brett?
Yeah, I'm doing well.
All right. So yeah. Here we go. So this is showing, you were talking about their way of life here, right? So they're very poor. Do you want to say anything on this, or do you want to go down? Like, I read all this, but I just moved right past it. Wait, can you read this?
No.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I know what section it is, but yeah, the screen's like intentionally blurred because that error thing is up.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. All right. Well, it seems to be, everything seems to be working all right. So this part, I like read this.
Sorry.
If there's something you want to say here, let me know.
I would just say something that's really interesting that I learned speaking to some people in a Twitter space. Is that I was asking them what kind of communication the peasants there have. So it's something that I was really wondering about, to what extent they, know what's going on in their society and stuff like that. But yeah, they were impressed by that being a good question, because, Americans are usually completely clueless, including another person that was in that Twitter space driving me crazy. Anyway, so they told me, that there's the Hausa language BBC broadcast that's very popular, and that there's also French radio broadcasts, so that they do get a lot of their news just from listening to the radio. But what was really interesting is that they told me, like, even people that poor, that their families usually own at least one smartphone, like really cheap smartphone, and even if they can only charge it once a week when they go to the market, or they sometimes have a cheap Chinese solar panel that they can charge it with, somewhat, they usually do check it every day and like receive WhatsApp messages. And so they have really low education levels and really low literacy levels. They're extremely susceptible to various kinds of like disinformation. So some, a graphic meme goes around and like everyone in the countryside comes to believe it really quickly because they can like barely read. And so Bazoum, this story was so crazy to me. So Bazoum is trying to get the fertility rates down because they have 6.75 children per woman, and Niger had 3 million people in the 1960s and now has 26 million people. And, they can't support them on their farm, so they're saying, polygamy is really common across all of Muslim Africa. And they're saying that, they have all these men in the cities that have, I'm sure it was exaggerating, but, they have 4 wives and you figure 6.75 children on average, they'll have like 20 plus children that they can't, exactly. And it's like they saying they don't even know their children's name, and they're like all in the streets begging and stuff like that.
Oh no.
So Bazoum is trying to get them to lower their fertility rates to like convince them to have fewer kids, to use birth control, not have multiple wives unless they can afford to take care of multiple wives and stuff like that. And all of them, because they have access to a degree of the internet and information, they were all sure that it was like a Bill Gates WEF conspiracy to like sterilize them and do eugenics and stuff like that, because they have access to like WhatsApp memes and stuff like that. And that's part of why he was so incredibly unpopular in the countryside, because he was trying to get their fertility levels down.
Oh my God, dude!
I thought that story was incredible.
Yeah. So at Cleveland on that flip, folks, I'm gonna rip that part out and make it its own little thing. I'll tag you. It might be longer than 60, so it might not go up as a YouTube short, but I might just throw that up right there as like its own video, because that's a very interesting story.
I made a thread about it some time ago. If you were to just search my Twitter page for like Bill Gates or whatever, you would find it easily enough.
So the thing with that story you just told is that it is eugenics, right? Like that is eugenics. It's true that it's eugenics. It's kind of like technically eugenics is what I'm saying, but like,
I mean, it's government family planning.
yeah, government family planning is low-level eugenics. It's acceptable eugenics. It becomes screwed up when you go a little bit more into it. But like, if there's kids starving in the street begging, you need to do some family planning.
I mean, like we need higher birth rates in the West, but you cannot have a society that persistently has 6.75 children per woman unless you intend to go to war constantly and be expanding like the Romans or something.
Yeah, right. And
I mean, I guess this is the problem the Gauls had. This is why the Gauls spread so fast.
is it really?
Well, they never had enough land. So, I mean, I don't know what their actual birth rates were, but they perpetually never had enough land spreading across Europe from Ireland to Galatia in Anatolia. So, obviously, they were constantly having more children than they could afford.
Yeah, that's true. But they also had the, you know what, that's probably what it is. It's probably a Bantu expansion thing. It's probably the result of that.
Yeah, so before Jared Diamond, only, like, white South Africans actually believed that, by the way.
Wait, what?
The Bantu expansion thing. Before Jared Diamond, only, like, white South Africans talked about that. And actually, people that study African history think that that's not an accurate perception of what happened because they look at it more as, like... from Jared Diamond, they look at it as a sort of modern imperialist expansion, and in reality, it was way more like the way agriculture spread to Europe from Anatolia, where there was land that didn't have agriculture yet, and people were just slowly moving and farming more land, but at the same time, were interacting with hunter-gatherers. So they argue that it was substantially less violent than people that talk about Bantu expansion would think, and more followed the pattern of agriculture spreading through Europe.
Yeah, so I had a conversation with some Africans recently on the internet. I think they were more from South Africa, but there were some conversations happening, and like, number one, the Bantu expansion is like Bantu people, which originated in the Congo, spreading out from the Congo to all other parts of Africa. And some of this happened semi-recently, especially as far as South Africa, which the implication of that is that they don't maybe have as long of a land claim, which isn't.
Well, the Zulus showed up after the Boers, didn't they?
I think so. I'm not too sure about it, but there's disagreement on it. But I was getting called like spawn of Yakub by these African people, which, by the way, if you don't know what that means, interesting thing is that a lot of Africans believe, and this is people in America who adhere to the ideas of the Nation of Islam. And I think the Black Hebrew Israelites as well, they believe that white people were created on an island off the coast north of Africa. There was an evil magician named Yakub who created white people, and that white people are the result of this. And that, I mean, that's a thing that they actually believe. It is what it is. I'm not making fun of anybody. That's just a thing. I think it's kind of interesting.
Anyway, yeah, I actually hate these arguments about who owned land a really long time ago. It's like entirely irrelevant, and every time someone brings it up, like, well, and it's especially, I don't even want to get into the right or wrong of it, but it's really, really bad in the Middle East, especially like Israel. Yeah. And it's funny because when you talk to them about it, they're like, oh, the thing that Jews are indigenous to Israel. It's like, no, actually, the Jews' own story to talk about how they migrated to this land and didn't start there. To be indigenous, you have to have been somewhere before recorded history, and the Jews have a recorded history of how they moved there. And then you find out that these Israelis don't believe in ancient histories or the Bible. So, neither Josephus or the Bible are accurate or matter. What matters is that they found some bones from 6,000 BC that are related to modern Israelis, and it's just shut up.
Yeah, it's like.
The only reason anyone controls land is because you can protect it with a gun. Like, that's the only reason any country exists. So just like acknowledge the nature of the situation. Yeah, exactly. It's just nonsense.
It's all historiography, historical argument. Who can create the most,
once you personally grew up somewhere, once it's out of living memory, when your family moves to an area, you have as much right to be there as anyone.
Yeah, I'm look, I'm third generation. I have great grandparents who were not American, but I'm American. I'm 100% American. I'm sure, yeah, I had great grandparents who spoke Gaelic and Hungarian, and my grandfather spoke Hungarian. But like, just because my grandfather spoke Hungarian, I'm not Hungarian. I have Hungarian blood. I have a cultural past connection to that, but I'm 100% USA, dude. Like, there's no, like, I'm not moving to Hungary. I live here. I'm from here. Everything I know, I was acculturated here.
Yeah, I mean, the most recent immigrant in my family was my mom's great grandpa or something.
Oh, no shit.
So I've really been in the country my family's really been in the country a long time.
Yeah, southern New England has a lot of more recent immigrants.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, still, it's like, even people whose parents were born in another country and moved here, some of them know the language, but a lot of them don't even know the language. And even if they do know the language, they're still like mostly American, because you're just there growing up in that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when like Asian Americans visit their home country, you know, they talk about how people can spot them on the street in like 1 second. Because, you know, like Asian Americans have completely different mannerisms than Asians from Asia. Like just walking without even seeing them speak, you can tell who's an American and who isn't.
And if you're on a college campus in the U.S.
Oh, yeah. 100% of the same thing. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. You can look, you're walking, there's a lot of Asian immigrants at colleges in the U.S. There's also a lot of Asian Americans. But you know.
Well, a lot of foreigners, Asians that are foreigners and Asian Americans. Yeah, and you can tell by just looking at them which ones are from Asia and which ones are from America. It's pretty crazy,
can tell
actually.
based on what they're wearing, like how they walk, like how they apply the makeup.
What's funny too, Japanese men are either like wear the most drab, nerdy clothes of all time or are just ridiculously flashy, and there's absolutely no in between.
No, seriously, no. Yeah, okay. So, long known as the Coup Belt by people who follow international relations, it has been living up to that name since 2020, with the region having experienced 6 coups in 11 months in 2021 to 2022. Besides systematic poverty and weak state institutions, the root of the problem has been an explosion of radical Islamic terrorism triggered by the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi in Libya in 2011, which led to tribal fighters from the Sahel returning home with their weapons and starting new rebellions. Can you expand on that? What the hell does that mean?
Okay, so basically there was an uprising among the Tuaregs, who are nomadic Saharan people in Mali in like 2005 to 2007, I believe. And ultimately, they kind of lost and had to flee the country. So then Gaddafi employed them in a sort of personal guard. 'Cause, you know, there are some benefits and some downsides to having foreign troops working for you, you know. And so he had them employed, and then once he was overthrown, they had no reason to stay in Libya. You know, other people were fighting for control of the country and stuff like that, so they looted his armory and returned home and basically restarted their rebellion. And at the same time as this, I mean, that was the catalyst, but at the same time as this, there was the war in Syria, because, you know, it's all part of the so-called Arab Spring.
Right.
And the Islamic State spread across Iraq and Syria. And so then Al-Qaeda, there were already kind of smaller Islamist insurgencies in the area, but Al-Qaeda, I mean, especially Boko Haram in Nigeria, of course, which has spilled into Niger a small amount. And then both Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State kind of franchised in the region. So actually, this is another really interesting thing that I learned from the people in the space about Niger. Is that they said that the imams, or whatever you want to call them, that recruit people into the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda usually come there from North Africa. You know, there are roads you can take across the Sahara. And they drive down, and he said they have a really new bills, like they're showing wealth and like kind of flash to make them, you know, what's going on appealing, and they like often like give them money because they're poor while they're preaching to them, and in the process of converting and radicalizing them. But he said that persistently they have really new bills, as in the money is like freshly printed, that they're handing out to people that they're trying to recruit, and that there's not a known reason why this is. I forgot about that until we were talking about this. Yeah, they don't. It's not actually clear where they're getting money from, but it's always freshly printed.
All right. Well,
that's not sketchy at all, right?
No, those are the types of little details that like
you can only learn from talking to people on the ground. Yeah, for sure.
That's what we like. That's the type of stuff that we need. Like,
yeah, I love Twitter Spaces.
Jeez, man, I love them too. I've learned so much cool stuff. A lot of good stuff going on Twitter Spaces. It's it's one of those things that's like, and just podcasts in general. It's like the current, you know, maybe this is viewing it too highly, but it could be like the coffee houses of the whatever, or the bars of the American Revolution and the Enlightenment, or the like.
Yeah. No, I see what you're saying.
You know, I'm not saying here like, oh, we're like intellectuals on like the level of Locke, but what I am saying is that this is a new way of disseminating and discussing and analyzing information, and along with that, often comes, it inevitably comes with changes.
Yeah, anyway, so basically, the terrorist groups sent recruiters down there there was already the poverty and instability in the region, and they were just able to, all of the, what you would call root causes of terrorism, exist really heavily in these regions, poverty, disillusionment, low education. They're already religiously susceptible because they're Sunni Muslims. Mm-hmm. To those specific groups, I don't mean to say anything about Sunni Muslims generally, but that's what Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State are. And so just for all of these reasons, there's a very young population, young men that don't feel like they have a future. It's easy to convince to get involved in violence that you tell them is going to change the world for the better, or that sort of thing. And all this stuff like that. I would add that polygamy probably has something to do with this, both in terms of there being too many kids, but it's really, really hard for poor people to find wives if the men with money are marrying 4 women each. So then, you join these groups and like, oh, we'll kidnap some girl and sell her to, give her to you as a bride and stuff like that. So, it's all the root causes that exist there. So, the terrorists took over Timbuktu. Some group of librarians seriously had to do like military-style raids on the city to save ancient manuscripts that were there.
You really said librarians. I thought you meant to say Liberians.
No. There's a book. I haven't actually read it. Apparently, sadly, the person didn't do a good enough job to justify how awesome the story is. But there's a book called The Badass Librarians of Timbuktu. Wow. That's like they seriously did military-style raids to save ancient transcripts there before the Islamists could destroy them. Sneaking into the city when it was controlled by terrorists.
That is badass.
Because Timbuktu was under terrorist control for like 4 years. They spread out just all across the region, and it's especially bad in Niger because it's very near their capital. And Burkina Faso is like 60% terrorist controlled. It's near their capital as well. But so it's spread in Niger. Both Boko Haram fleeing airstrikes and that sort of thing moved in from the south east, and then from the one in Mali, they spread out from the southwest, and so they're fighting them in multiple levels and all these problems. And basically, it just horribly undermined the civil governments in the region because they're not, security is like one of the most basic services the government provides. It's the most basic service the government provides. And something to remember is that terrorists in this region, they're not like planning conspiracies where they are like setting bombs in public squares or at, discotheques or that sort of thing. They're hordes of dudes on small motorcycles, like dirt bikes, like going across the desert with guns and like slaughtering everyone in the villages and just stealing everything that's there. Oh. So they're like pre-modern raiders, except that they actually are on motorcycles, not on horse or camelback or whatever. But
like bandits. They're like
there's always been an element of banditry in this. But sometimes you hear about how like the Barbary pirates were kind of radical Muslims or whatever. It's kind of that sort of thing. They convince them that these people aren't the right kind of Islam, so they don't have property rights. They're haram or whatever, they're takfirs.
Yeah.
And so then they go and they slaughter the villages and steal all of their stuff basically. And it's been happening all over, just absolutely brutal. And so this majorly undermined the civil governments in the region from a complete failure to provide security, and there were already really weak state institutions. Another thing that I learned is that from those same guys from Niger is that, a lot of the places that were British, they're more decentralized. So Nigeria is a federal state and has a lot of different regional institutions, but all of the French colonies were extremely centralized. So, for example, the one guy was from Agadez that I talked to the most, and he said you can only get you can only get a passport in Niamey, and it's like a 2,000-kilometer mile round trip or something like that to go, like, just get a single passport so you can leave the country. And of course, probably once you get there, you have to wait for like 3 weeks to get it issued or something, or longer, so yeah, they didn't really have state institutions or like law and order or stuff like that far outside of the capitals and the cities anyway. So you have these tribal people that, the state doesn't do anything for them at all besides maybe have a road near their village and collect taxes when they go to the market. And besides that, they have like no interactions with the government.
So I want to make a point on this, a larger point that actually this is just a good point. So I'm going to Cleveland this one because I want to look back at it. Is that, like, this is true if you look throughout the world, look at any place in the world that both the British and then other European countries colonized. There's a reason that the British Empire got to be the most powerful and largest empire in history, and it was their bureaucracy. And if you look
civil service,
you can look at any two comparable places. If you look at Indonesia, which was a colony of the Dutch, and you compare it to Malaysia, the people are very similar. They come from very, very similar countries. They speak the same language. They call it something different, but it's basically the same language. It's like one of those Balkan things where they call the same language different. Things. But Malaysia has like 4 times the income of Indonesia. And if you look in Central America, the countries like, I think, Costa Rica and Belize, which had more influence from the English, more so in Costa Rica. Costa Rica is the best off country in Central America. Belize is number 2. You can do the same thing in the Caribbean. You can do the same thing in Africa. These countries, part of it was that the British trusted the indigenous rule, and that in them trusting the indigenous rule, number one, for the British, it allowed them to be decentralized in their leadership of these places because it allowed them to save on expenses by just saying, you know what, you guys, you're now in charge. You were either already in charge and you're still in charge, or we took out the people in charge and now this other group, we're putting them in charge, which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. But what that meant is that they were culturally informed in the way that they were leading different people throughout the world. In India, they did the same thing. They allowed the indigenous people to keep leading, and they did the same thing over here. And that allowed for the people that were already living there to be more involved in the bureaucracy and in managing the state. So they had people with these skills who could continue doing it into the future. And that's why those places that are colonized by the British have much better, even till today, on average. It's across the board, any specific place.
Yeah, they were way better at state building. But I mean, the other thing is, there's the expression, if you see 2 fish fighting, there's an Englishman nearby. They're really good at setting people against each other as well, and thus forming a type of consensus. Have you ever read the book Tournament of Shadows?
I have not.
Oh yeah, it's a history of like the great game, the struggle between England and Russia for Central Asia. It's really, really interesting, but a big part of it is about them taking control of like northern India and Pakistan and stuff like that. So it talks really extensively about all the stuff that it's called Tournament of Shadows.
Tournament of Shadows. I'll link that book down below.
It's very good. And it's kind of like a pop history in the sense that it's kind of told, the story's kind of told like a novel or something, with like England and Russia as the characters basically, and it has kind of like a travelogue type feel, but it's really, really good. I mean, it talks extensively about how they did what you're describing in northern India and Pakistan and stuff like that in order to take power. It's also very important now because they still have this belief in, the global pivot in Central Asia, which is just something they made up. It's like something some academic made up 200 years ago that's never been true. But, they still, like, all of geopolitics is based on this belief. The global pivot, where they believe that the world centers on Central Asia and that whoever controls it is going to be the world power. Like the origin of the concept of geopolitics is this belief of the Central Asian pivot.
Really?
And yeah, so this is why they still will fight for Afghanistan, why there's still the Belt and Road Initiative, pipelines in Tajikistan, everything like that.
That's some Aryan shit, dude.
Yeah, and it made them completely obsessed with Russia because, Russia was expanding organically there just the same way it always had, and they had to kind of go over the Himalayas to get there and all this other stuff. But it's why they were contesting it, and it still is one of the most influential ideas in international relations, and it was made up in the first place and has never been true.
Wow. Okay. Well, that could be a whole topic in itself. Are you?
Oh yeah.
Are you wanting to? It's 9:00, by the way.
Oh, we probably should wrap it up. My kids have a difficult day, and my wife got home from work right before we did this.
No worries, man. A whole hour is good enough. So we talked a little bit about Niger, and we talked about a few other things. I hope you guys got something out of this. I'm gonna hang on for a second, so don't leave the stream. But Brad, thanks so much for coming, man. It was a great conversation.
Okay.
Welcome back anytime, obviously.
Okay, I can leave the stream without it messing you up, right?
Oh yeah, you're good. Yeah.
Okay.
You can go.
All right. Good night. Thank you.
All right. Good night, man. Okay, so I'm gonna finish talking about a little bit of this just on my own. You guys got any questions in the comments? Please let me know. Okay, so this is the area here in Mali. Mali borders all these other places. If you're just listening to this, you can't see them, but Burkina Faso, Guinea, all these other places we talked about. Niger, heavy influence of jihadists exiting outward from Mali. So Niger had been under elected leaders without any coups since 2011, when a coup overthrew the prior president, held new elections in which Mahamadou Issoufou, hope that was right, was elected. He was described as a staunch Western ally, and Western involvement continued to build up throughout the course of his presidency. Most notably, the United States built an enormous and expensive drone base that we talked about near Agadez. That's what we were talking about. Is it on the map? Nah, nope. Yeah, so $500 million in security assistance to the country since 2012, and probably also black budget, which is just anything else. There, we don't know where that is. That's the missing trillions of dollars from the Pentagon. Craig says, I'm ignorant of Africa. I learned a lot. Thanks for this. Yeah, thanks for enjoying that, Craig. Jabzy has a lot of great videos, by the way. I've said that people should listen to or watch Jabzy's videos before. He did a great history on China, which I've referenced several times. It's like 3 hours. He has one on Africa, I think during the colonial period, a very long one as well. And I would recommend that because Africa is very neglected, but it's important. It's part of world history. We should know about it. And that's part of the motivation for why we're here today. So yeah, let's see. So that's enough for that's enough for tonight. Let me look through and see if I had anything else that I wanted to talk about. What happened in Niger, and when I'm doing this, I'm about to wrap up, so just ask questions if you'd like to ask them about this or anything else. Cleveland. So what happened in Niger is nothing other than the struggle of the people of Niger with their colonizers, with colonizers who are trying to foist their rules of life on them and their conditions and keep them in the state that Africa was in hundreds of years ago. That came from Prigozhin, by the way. I should have said that first, but that came from Prigozhin, who died yesterday, I think. His plane crashed. His plane crashed. I'm not going to say anything else about it. I mean, you guys draw your own conclusions. I don't know what happened. But so there's no evidence that Russia is like getting into Niger. But number one, I mean, they probably are, at least a little bit. We were in that. Like, they're everywhere, just like we were everywhere. We as in the U.S., not me. I'm not part of this. And then with colonizers who are trying to foist their rules, but Russia will go in. And actually it was the other one where they're, oh my God, these videos were so funny. Watch these videos, read the whole article. I'm going to link them down below of Brad's. There was a picture, it must be in the next article, of some kids with a Russian flag, though, that I wanted to show. But a drastic failure of U.S. policies in the region, especially given that, yet again, at least some of the coup leaders were U.S. trained. Most notably, a special forces commander named Brigadier General Moussa Salau Barmao, who is known to be a close U.S. ally in Niger, publicly gave support to the coup. And here we have a picture of what looks to be a U.S. general. I think I see 4 stars on his chest. That's a lot. And then here he is in the announcement picture just 1 month later. Oh my God, June 2023 to July 2023. He is in the picture of the military leaders in Niger announcing the coup with the literal colonel major announcing it in the blue shirt, sitting down. Arthur asked, did you visit any parts of Africa while in the military? AFRICOM footprint gotten much better since 2007. No, but I've had a few friends deployed to Africa. I was in the Middle East, so I did go through the Suez Canal, but that's the closest we ever went to Africa. But yeah, the Horn of Africa, as well as a few other places. My former roommate, who was in the Army, he was in Africa for a little bit. And so, I mean, I'm friends with other guys in his platoon, so they went as well. Okay. At the same time, I already touched on this, but in Brad's words, at the same time, it's undeniable that this could lead to the expulsion of U.S. and French troops and leaves a potential opening for Russia and Wagner. Okay, so we're going to share this tab instead. Okay. Complaints, whether of communities or individuals, it is possible to adjust, but war undertaken by a coalition for sectional interests whose progress there is no means of foreseeing may not be easily or creditably settled. So complaints, whether of communities or individuals, it is possible to adjust, but war undertaken by a coalition, this is a quote from Archimedes, I don't remember how to pronounce that. CIA op, yeah, maybe Craig, I'm not sure. But war undertaken by a coalition for sectional interest. So I think what's being said here is that a coalition for sectional interest, so a coalition of people with multiple different interests, that's a problem. And I think the reason that really is a problem is because that means that there is a situation that has become so untenable that multiple different groups are uniting under this one problem. And you can fix one person or one group having a problem, but it's much harder to fix a problem that a bunch of people have. You probably need some sort of foundational change if that's happening. It's a mark of something greater. So there's a coup. There was a coup in Niger. And this region has 440 million people, okay? This right here, all these countries in orange, in dark orange, for those of you listening, there's 4 countries in dark orange, and then there's about 8 or 9 in light orange. These are all ECOWAS countries, which is a NATO-led thing. But 4 of them, Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, and Niger, they have all had coups since 2020, and they've been suspended, which is an issue. Okay, so apparently in the comment section, we have multiple soldiers and Marines, or I shouldn't assume that, I think, military people who have been off the coast of Africa or in Africa. So yeah, we got some experience there. Come to the Discord, discuss those things. Would love if everyone came to the Discord. I love the conversations going on there. It's really made me happy. I was just talking about that today. Long form conversations on the internet are happening on the Illegitimate Scholar Discord. Just come out, check it out. Okay. So, suspended members of ECOWAS aligned with Russia and the Wagner private military company. So this is kind of the situation we're in. You see here, you keep going down. Oh, maybe it's not here. Never mind. Okay, Cleveland. I'm going to cut out the end of that. All right, so that's it for today, guys. I am going to stop sharing my screen. I will hold off for a couple minutes if anybody has any questions, which I always ask that, and people never really do, but that's okay. One day someone's going to have a question, and at that point, I will be ready. So, yeah, now I'm just stalling. I already Cleveland did it to myself. Oh, yeah, and the Patreon guys, $2. I'd really appreciate it if you signed up. You don't have to. Slightly extended episodes. I'm not going to keep anything, important out of it, but, it allows for me to do larger digressions, talk about other things that are related, but that maybe someone who's not as into this stuff as some of you guys who are listening to every single one of my episodes would want, because clearly some of you cannot get enough of what I produce, and I truly really appreciate that. I think you guys are crazy, and you have I listen to everything I produce, and I listen to it, I'm like, God, this fucking guy's annoying. So the fact that you guys listen to everything I do, I mean, I think you're weird. I honestly do, but that's okay. I guess I'm weird too. It's an okay type of weird, but Yeah, the Patreon's got extra stuff. I'm going to set up, for those of you already on the Patreon, I would really appreciate if you did this, if you are on the Patreon, but I'm going to set up a way for you guys to ask questions. If I forget to do that tomorrow, someone please remind me, but I'm going to set up a way for you guys to ask questions, which I'm then going to answer on the Illegitimate Scholar Live. I'm going to try a few other things too. I'm making a bunch of moves right now. I'm seriously, like, every day I'm doing something. No Illegitimate Scholar next week. I'm going to be in Miami, and then I'm going to be in Kansas City for the Irish Fest. So if anybody's in Miami or Kansas City and you want to meet for a beer or something, send me a message on Twitter or in the Discord. And yeah, so I'm just going to read these comments here. Somali Pirate Ops, Arthur, that is pretty freaking sweet, man. I mean, I was a utilities marine. I'd just be sitting on the damn ship. But, you know, if you're someone that deals with that, I don't really want to shoot out a little boat of poor people out of the water. But, you know, it'd be cool to be, you know, involved with that, especially maybe you get to help some people. One country I would visit in Africa. So I'm gonna give two answers, because number one, I would go for North Africa. Love the Middle East, and North African culture is very similar. I would really, really love to go to Morocco. That's a country I wanted to go to for a long time. I will eventually go there. Love their architecture. Love everything. Love all the culture about Morocco. I think it's the best. And I'm a big fan. I don't think I've ever talked about this, but, you know, gosh, rest in peace, frickin' no reservations, Anthony Bourdain. I'm a big fan of Anthony Bourdain, and one of my favorite places he ever visited was Morocco. I would really love to go there. But I'm going to give a sub-Saharan country as well, because that is, you know, I mean, that's like, it's kind of a cop-out to go, because culturally it's not really. So sub-Saharan Africa. You know, not knowing too much about different countries, I would probably say Kenya. I would want to go to sub-Saharan Africa for the animals. So I would love to do experiences like, you know, animals in their natural habitat. And I think Kenya has a lot of stuff for that. There's probably some other countries I'd go to as well if I did some more research. But yeah, that is where I'd go. I'd be kind of afraid to go to a lot of the places. But there's, you know, there's 24 countries in Africa that are safe as hell. So it's like, you don't have to worry about it that much. But, you know, I thought there's certain countries that you think are okay, and then they go crazy. So, you know, like Venezuela. Anybody else got some questions before I get out here? Doing a lot. Somebody literally just joined the stream, and I'm about to end it. So sorry. But yeah, I'm just taking any last questions if you got one. And then I'm going to hop off, and I'm going to put this episode up. I'm going to have something for you guys on Monday, and then I'll be off to Miami on Tuesday, I think. Oh, and Monday, 5 till midnight. I'm going to drop that link below. That is going to be the new show with Biting the Bullet, Adam Nutter, and Kyle Matochik. Yeah, that's what I'm doing. Yeah, going to Miami for the Patrick Bet David thing. All right, no one's got any questions. All right, good night, everybody. Thanks for coming out. Hope you liked it.